Support and resistance levels do move around, and we can accommodate for that. It's called dynamic support and resistance. And I'll show you exactly how dynamic support and resistance works in comparison to just the regular support and resistance that we have on the chart. So if I get rid of this and we start from the beginning, I think most traders are aware of support and resistance. We get a bottom, this is support, price gets to this level, and it bounces off it a couple of times, and it either breaks through it and continues to move up, or it'll break down below it and then in some kind of way retest it from below, turning that support into resistance. Across the top we have resistance, price bounces off of an established level, then we'll either break through it or it'll just bounce off it once again. Now these levels aren't everywhere. They're not as predominant as I think traders like to think they are. So what we can do instead is look at something called dynamic support resistance. Now, this doesn't do away with traditional support resistance. This is something that you can add to traditional support and resistance, but this is a kind of support and resistance that actually moves around with the market. Now, the way we look at dynamic support and resistance is with a moving average. Now, when it comes to adding a moving average to your chart for this reason, one moving average doesn't fit all. Let's add a moving average to the chart. By default, this is going to be a 34 setting. Now, we're going to take a look at this 34 EMA, and we want to see if price is bouncing from this 34. If it gets above the 34, does it come back to it and bounce off of it? If it's underneath the 34, does it come up to it and bounce back down after it reaches it? And this 34, it actually looks really good. Some other moving averages that you can try, some other settings would be something like a 20. I find the 20 period moving average to be a really good area of dynamic support and resistance. And we see this quite a bit in here. We have an area here, again. These are all areas where the price is getting to this 20 EMA and then bouncing from it. It's using this moving average as a solid area of dynamic support and resistance. It's dynamic because even though this area of support is at one spot, it changes. And this moving average accommodates that change. Now, again, we're going to want to set our moving averages so that they best accommodate these areas of support and resistance. Now, you're going to notice that not all bounces are off the 21. We do have areas where the price moves past the 21, but then continues to move in the original trending direction. So when you're looking at dynamic areas of support and resistance, often we like to use two different moving averages. So let's add a second moving average to this and see if we can get a zone where the more extreme price moves will bounce from it. So let's turn that first one to red so that we can see it. So we have a distinction now between the red and the blue. The red is a 20 moving average and the blue is the 34. So there's not a lot of difference between the two of them. So what I will do is increase the value of the blue one. Now 34, even 50 is still going to be pretty close. If we go with a 50, we don't see a significant change. This is better. Absolutely, it's better. We have an area where the price bounces from the 50 right in here. We've got a bounce. We've got another. This is more or less a bounce. Price has pushed through it, but then has moved back above. Now, as you know, areas of support resistance are zones. They're not going to be exact touching points. We're not going to have the price get exactly to that price and then move from that. What we'll see is that price almost gets to that area and bounces from it. That is an area of support resistance. Price will get exactly to that area and then bounce from it. And then finally, the price can actually pass through it and then bounce from that area. All of these price points are being affected by this zone, by this window, by this area of support and resistance. Support resistance is not an exact price, but a zone or an area. That's why it's called areas of support and resistance. So when we're looking at something like this, where we see that the price has moved past it a little bit, that's perfectly fine. We expect that. This is also the case. This might be a little bit more than you like, and this is quite a bit more than we would like. So let's make an adjustment. Let's see if we can change that 50 to something a little more applicable. So let's change that to 100. We'll slow that down a little bit more. So with a 100, what we're seeing is the price getting into the space between that 20 and the 100 and using that space quite nicely as an area of support and resistance. Remember how how we just talked about that area of support and resistance being an area? When you're using moving averages, you can do the exact same thing. When you have two different moving averages, that space between those two moving averages could be that area. That could be the area where the price is going to be affected as support and resistance. So again, we're looking at the 20 and we're seeing that price is being very nicely affected at this 20 EMA. And we see this over and over again. We see this up here as well. Price is coming down to that 20 and it's being affected quite nicely. And then we're seeing areas where the price passes that 20. We see that here and we see that in here and we see a little bit of that here. We see that here again. We see these areas where the price gets beyond the 20, but is still bouncing from these areas. So we have the price pulling into this area. Even though it got past the 20, it does turn around and go back into that trending direction. We see that again in here. We see that right in here where the price gets into the zone. It gets past the 20, but it does go back into that trending direction. Now it's these dynamic areas of support and resistance that I pay more attention to than the static areas of support and resistance. Now I don't want to avoid one completely. I don't want to look only at these dynamic areas and completely ignore the horizontal levels of support and resistance. Now in these areas, market trend does play a factor. When we look at these areas of support and resistance, we see we've got this flat zone right here, but we have the price dropping below the flat zone just a little bit, this area of support, pulling back up and using this moving average as an area of resistance. From here, we could safely assume that the price is going to want to continue to move down beyond this area of support because we have a very nearby area of resistance that is affecting the price. If it is going to be a solid affected area, it is going to push past the established horizontal level that we see here. This all feeds back into the whole trend pullback trade scenario. If I'm in a downtrend, I want the price to move away from the moving averages and then come back to the moving averages and use that moving average as a dynamic area of resistance and then move away. That move away is going to trigger some kind of trade. Now the same thing goes with the market moving up. You're looking for the price to move away from the moving averages, pull back into the moving averages, and then continue to move up. And that pullback into the moving average is the price bouncing off of a dynamic area of support. Now, if we take these two different moving averages and I turn them into less of a line and more of a cloud that doesn't have an orientation, it'll just be a one colored cloud. So let's trigger that. I've got this one already set up. So we've got a one colored cloud. Now at this point, I don't have to pay too much attention to the trend direction. I know that support and resistance works in such a way that if the price is above a certain level, it will come in from the top, use that area as support, and then move away in that trending direction. And if we're looking at the price underneath that level, we see that all in here, it moves away from it, pulls back into it, and then will continue to move away from it once it gets into that level. And if we look at these areas on the chart, we've got an area in here, we can see it in here, in here, in here, in here. We've got all these areas where the price is getting into this dynamic zone, the space in between these two moving averages. So we've got price moving into the zone, into the zone, into the zone, into the zone. And when this happens, we simply look for an opportunity to trade away from that zone. So if we're looking at an area maybe such as this, what we're seeing is the price gets into the zone. We don't get any kind of trigger to continue a trade outside of the zone. Instead, it falls through. Now we're at the bottom or the underside of this dynamic zone of support and resistance. Price comes back from underneath, gets into this zone. Now we're using it as resistance and we get the trigger, the signal to go short as the market then continues to move away from that area. Now this is a moving average cloud. It's one of the toys that we have in the UBFX members area. But if you don't have the cloud, the moving averages are going to work just fine. If you are stuck for settings, try something like the 20 and the 100. That is going to give you a good starting place. When we compare static levels of support and resistance versus dynamic levels of support and resistance, we see more trading opportunities using a dynamic area of support and resistance than we do seeing a standard static horizontal levels of support and resistance. Try adding this to your methodology. Support and resistance does not have to be just horizontal levels. It can be dynamic as you are using a moving average to establish those support and resistance levels. I hope you found this video useful. If you liked the video, please like and do subscribe if you haven't done that. I will be putting out as many of these kinds of videos as I can. And if you want to work with me directly, you can check me out at ultrablueforex.com. The link is in the description below. I do have a members area where I work one-on-one with my members. But if that's not the case, thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next video.